Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Continuing my director retrospective series, and I'm looking at another P.T Anderson film. Today I'm looking at Inherent Vice. And this stars Joaquin Phoenix, Catherine Waterston, Josh Brolin, Benicio del Toro and Reese Witherspoon and a variety of others. For those who haven't seen it, this is really the story. It's set in the 70s and looks at drug-fueled Los Angeles private investigator Larry Doc Spirello as he investigates the disappearance of a former girlfriend, Sasha Faye Hemsworth, and she believes her current boyfriend, who is a married man and land developer Mickey Wolfman, is the target of an abduction attempt by his wife and her lover. In helping Sasha, Doc not only goes on a search for Wolfman, but others who go missing, including Sasha and one who is assumed to be murdered. This film was based upon a Thomas Pynchon novel, and it was the first real adaptation I think that P.T Anderson did. And it's sort of he's still able to make it his own, which I really love. There's something really interesting about this film. It's a detective story, so I'm a big fan of these, so that's a draw for me to begin with. And it feels like detective novels and movies from the 40s and 50s, and of course the 60s and 70s, but more the 40s and 50s. In this, he creates his own language, his own dialogue, and it's very reminiscent of those old sort of detective stories and movies that they made early in the 40s and 50s. It also reminds me a lot of Rian Johnson's first film, Brick, which sort of was ultimately the Maltese Falcon set today. And even though this is set in the 70s, it still has that 40s and 50s dialogue and sort of colourful characters and circumstances that the characters find themselves in. What I really continuously enjoy and like about P.T Anderson is when he picks a period, like in Boogie Nights he did the 70s as well. When he picks his particular period, he commits to it. You believe this is part of that era. He has interesting characters that maneuver within that story in that era, and it just feels very authentic and real. The only difference with this film and a lot of other period films that he does is the dialogue doesn't feel so relevant anymore. It feels like it's from somewhere else and it's a different period of time. And so with the dialogue the way it is, sometimes it's a little hard to understand what's going on. It's a film you really need to pay attention to. There's a lot going on. The mystery and twists and turns within the story is sometimes hard to follow. But what they do really well is our eyes through the world is Doc. We see the world through his eyes. So when he works something out, we work something out. He's our eyes and tells us the plot and the story and what's the mystery about what's actually happening. And we learn that as he learns it, which I think is a really interesting and creative way to do it. There's also a voiceover, and the thing with the voiceover in this film is it's an actual person. So a lot of the times you hear, a disembodied voice or someone speaking, you never get to see them, or you may get to see them at the end of the film. It's always someone telling a story. With this, it's an actual person, and sometimes she's in scenes, but she's not part of the scene. In one particular scene, Doc's going to talk to someone about something, and he's driving in the car, and she's sitting there narrating his thoughts and where the story's going, but she's not actually part of that particular scene. And I think this is a stroke of genius. This is something interesting and unique and a different way of doing things, and I think it's refreshing in many ways. All the acting is fantastic in this. Joaquin Phoenix gives another fantastic performance. There's something about P.T Anderson and collaboration between Joaquin Phoenix. He seems to get some really great performances out of him and gets him to do things you wouldn't quite expect characters and actors to do. And I think it's fantastic. And he just does a really great job. Josh Brolin's really good playing Bigfoot in this, a sort of known police detective, and he's really good in this and gives a great performance. And it's sort of an odd character, but he brings such realism and interesting traits to it that I really enjoy watching his performance. Catherine Waterston's fantastic. This is probably the best film I think she's done. It's the best character she's played, playing Shasta Faye, and I really like her performance here. I think she brings such an interesting element to it. The dialogue sort of really works for her, and the character she's playing is sort of like a femme fatale type character, where she draws in our main character into this particular seedy and dark, twisted world, and he has to try and navigate through it in order to help her. In true noir classic style, which I really like. Reese Witherspoon's quite solid in this. Other actors that appear in it, Jenna Malone plays an ex-heroin addict who's trying to get her life back on track, who thinks her husband's dead, played by Owen Wilson. Benicio del Toro is really funny in it. There's just really colourful and interesting characters all the way through the film, and they all give a great and solid performance. It's a movie that I've had to go back to time and time again, and whatever station in life I'm at, I get something else from it. And it is a little hard to follow, and you really need to be paying attention and taking in everything you see, every name you hear, and everything that people are telling you, because it all relates to the story in some way. I haven't read the Thomas Pynchon novel, but I think it's I get a sense of what the novel would be like with this particular film. There's been many people talking about what this film's actually about and what's actually going on. And I saw this interview with Edward Norton, and he talked about how, for him, he just sort of let the film wash over him, and the fact that people liked the 60s and people didn't, and people survived it and people didn't. And that's sort of what the film looks at. It's like the conflict between the cops and sort of the hippie generation, and the events of Manson and his family and the murders that took place in 1969, and the fear and anxiety that still exist with that. There's a lot of paranoia in this film, and this sort of film encapsulates a particular period of time and what was sort of happening in that moment in history. It sort of starts to get you to question characters you think are immoral end up being moral, and characters are moral end up being immoral, and it's kind of interesting in that aspect. Like Doc, you look at him to begin with, he smokes weed, he takes drugs. He's kind of a wild and crazy sort of character. But he's actually a good person underneath it all. And he actually does want to help, and he tries to help the best he can. And ultimately, he does some great things within the film, which you wouldn't expect when you first see him. And the same with Josh Brolin's character, Bigfoot. He starts as a moral character and becomes immoral, because the choices he makes as a particular character make him very questionable, and he's not as straight-laced and straight-edged as you think he is. So it sort of plays with concepts, the idea of good and bad, and the complexities of human beings, and how we're not always consistent, and how we make bad decisions. What you see on the outside isn't what's in the inside. It goes back to that, you can't judge a book by its cover, and this is what this film really feels like. You can't judge the characters until you go along the journey with them and find out who they truly are, and what their motivations are, and what they're trying to accomplish within the film. And I think this is a good way of learning not to judge people. And like I said a moment ago, you've just got to let this film wash over you. You can't come in with preconceived notions or concepts or perceptions of what this film is and what these characters are. You just got to experience it. It's the film P.T. Anderson's really done, where it's just more about an experience and not necessarily about a straightforward story. And once again, it's about characters. He creates interesting characters that inhabit the world, and that's how we see the world through it. And that's how we learn things about the world and what's transpiring. And I think this is fantastic, and P.T. Anderson has a great ability at doing this. And this is another one of his great films. This is in my top 3 of his films, along with Magnolia and There Will Be Blood. I just think he's such an interesting voice and so refreshing, and I'm drawn to him so much because he's so different, and he's making different films, and all his catalogue has been a different movie every time, and not being the same genre, the same ideas. And I think this is a big draw to him as a particular filmmaker. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of Tarantino, and not the films he makes, they're not genre pieces, but it's just in who he is as a person, and how he's able to get actors and put them in certain roles they've never done before. And once again, this film deals with themes of love and loss and regret, and it seems these are the themes that run throughout pretty much all of his catalogue of films. Directors like this and films like this I really crave. I want to enjoy cinema again. I feel a bit disillusioned by cinema today, and movies like this give me hope and faith back in cinema, and that maybe going back is the key to enjoying movies once again, because a lot of the movies today just aren't very good, or they're okay. There's nothing really blowing me away. He reminds me a lot of Tarantino in that he'll take known actors and put them into roles they've never done before, and I think that's refreshing. And he came out at the same time as Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh, as well as Kevin Smith. So it's sort of an interesting place and time that he's part of, but he's such a unique genius. And his films aren't box office hits, but they're still great movies. So it just goes to show you can still make movies and they mightn't be box office hits, but they're still a really good movie. And this is a great example of that. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.